Hello, friends. How are you this week? It is me, Tracy Mooney, and I am so excited because we're already getting comments. So I'm so excited that you're all here and ready to join another live from Keepsake Quilting. Today, I'm very, very excited to have Pammie Jane. She's a fabric designer for Dear Stella Fabrics. She's a quilt designer, does amazing quilt patterns, and she's an author and teaches and does just a whole host of things. Oh, and she absolutely adores cats. So I'm sure we're going to be talking about that today. So without further ado, I am going to introduce you. If you don't already know her, she's pretty darn famous already. Hello, Pammie Jane. How
Hi.
are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you, Tracy?
I am good. I am good. So thank you so much for saying yes to joining me live, sort of spur of the moment, like it was relatively last minute. And
Absolutely, no problem.
I usually start our little interviews by asking how you got started sewing and quilting.
Um, I had really no introduction. It was just something I sort of always did.
Mm.
So, my grandmother uh, made all 6 of her children's clothing. So
Oh, nice.
my mom had handmade clothing by my grandma growing up, and my grandma had this huge, like, fabric room and, the, like, pattern cabinets that they have at, like, Joann? She had one of those in her
Wow.
sewing room, and so my cousins and I would go to our grandma's house when we were kids, and there were quite a few girl cousins close in age, and we would have fashion shows. Like, we would raid my grandmother's fabric stash and have fashion shows in the basement. And, much to her dismay, because we made, like, a giant mess, and we also did things like, um, mix her nail polish colors together and things
Oh,
I'm
no.
fairly certain she did not appreciate at all, but we had a blast when we were kids. And, um, yeah, I would just go to her house, and I would just play with her sewing machine, and she wouldn't even say anything about it. I would just, like, sew stuff, and yeah, I remember, like, making dresses, and I think I was around 8, and I
Mm.
asked for my own sewing machine for Christmas.
Wow.
And so I just always wanted to sew, and I remember, like, my grandma gave me fabric from her, giant stash, and it was, of course, like, 70s retro crazy fabric, and, I remember making a coat with, like, lace ruffles on the sleeves for my Barbie.
Oh my, how cute. So
Yeah,
you got
so
did you get the sewing machine when you were 8?
I did. I
Wow.
did. I don't know what happened to it. It was like a kid's sewing machine
Mhm.
that I think my other grandma bought from QVC. So, I don't even know what brand it was, but I used it until it didn't work anymore.
Oh my gosh, amazing.
Yeah,
So
so
how
sewing
did
was, like,
you
just always a part of my life.
wow. I mean, that what a great legacy, your grandmother gave you and sort of gave you the freedom to just play.
Yeah, and it's funny because my mom and my aunts say that, like, if they were kids and had done what me and my cousins did, like, raided her stash and her just started playing with her sewing machine, they probably would have been in big trouble, but, like, with her grandkids, she was a lot more
All bets
lenient
are
and
off, it's grandkids.
yeah, 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 and so, like, I don't know if their experience is necessarily true, saying that, "Oh, we would have been dead if we had ti" I don't know if that's necessarily true, but she was awesome at, like, just letting us be creative, so
That's amazing. So how did you get started in quilting?
Also my grandma. She
Mm,
never actually quilted. Like, no one in my family was really a quilter, but we all, knew how to sew, and, um, when I got married, she gave me I don't know if she bought it at a garage sale. I have conflicting stories whether it was my great-grandma's sewing machine, and it was like a yellow Kenmore, like, from
mhm,
the 70s or 80s, but she gave it to me when I got married and gave me a box of fabric, which was from a garage sale. Um, so she gave me a box of fabric that was from a garage sale, and there was a quilting book in it that I still have. Um, and the book was from like 1992, and I'm looking at it because it's on the shelf over there. Classic Country Quilts is what it was called.
I love it.
Yeah, and I think it was, like, put together by, Quilt Maker Magazine, if I
Mm,
recall correctly, and I was just absolutely in love with the quilts in that book, and I was like, "I'm gonna do this." So,
and so you had been making, like, garments before that?
yeah, I mostly made clothes before that.
Mhm,
Clothes, like, small bags and things like that, like, things that, any cheapy sewing machine can handle, and yeah,
mhm. So,
yeah.
did you find the transition from clothing to, like, your quarter-inch seam, was it tricky at all?
Um, yes and no, because I started, like I said, with, like, gifted sewing machines that weren't necessarily designed with a quilter in mind, and so I didn't have, like, a quarter-inch foot. I was f For the first little bit, I was just eyeballing it, and then,
Mhm.
um, when I really
We all
decided,
were.
like yeah, yeah, so I decided, "Oh my gosh, I love this, I wanna do this," and I was like a poor married college student, and, um, I, like, pinched all my pennies and bought myself, like, a little Janome sewing machine, um, and it came with a quarter-inch foot, and I was, like, so grateful to have that quarter-inch foot, and I actually used that sewing machine for a solid 10 years at least, and, like, never did a bit of maintenance. I, like, free motion quilted on that machine, like, taught myself how to free motion quilt. I did everything on that machine, and yeah, and I was just grateful to have it and learn all the, like, fundamentals.
That's amazing. That's amazing. At least you had a really, like, good machine to
Yeah, yeah,
to
and
work
it
with.
really wasn't that expensive, like, I bought it was one that I had bought refurbished, and at the
Mhm.
time and this was probably 20 years ago, at the time, I think it was, um, like $300. It was, like, refurbished from, like, Ken's Sewing Center or something, but that was a lot to me, 20
Mhm.
years
Oh,
ago.
yeah. Oh, yeah. It's funny because when I was learning to quilt, like, my mom and my sister both were garment sewists, and my sister gave me a baby lock, but it was like a mechanical. It was really, it
Mhm.
had the dials and all of that, and the stitches kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. I had no idea that I could just bring it somewhere and have it tuned up and fixed. And so I scraped together my pennies and I bought a brother from like Sears, and it was refurbished as well. And I thought like that was the most amazing thing on the planet. And I had no idea that I had really downgraded in quality. The other machine actually was like a much better, like all
Yeah.
metal machine. It was like super heavy and
Well, and I think
um
I was in the same boat as you, like, I just knew that I had a local sewing machine shop, and they were raving about Janomes at the time, like, that was the
mhm,
big thing at the time. Everybody and I had heard of Bernina. I had met a couple other quilters that had Berninas, and that was, like, out of the question, like, there was no way that I could afford which that's all I
mhm.
sew on now, you can see, one but, um actually, that's not true. I still have a Janome serger, um, but yeah, um, that was like the big deal was Genomes. And this was just like a little plastic, barely digital, just it was like digital push button just to select what stitch. Other than
Mm-hmm.
that, it was, you know, it was not really a top of the line machine. But like I said, I thought I was so cool because I had that machine.
You were. I promise you, you were. So before I even ask this question, I just do want to say that if you're watching live and you have a question, please drop it in the comments. And you can even just drop a comment and let us know that you're there. I see that Anne said hello from the Florida Panhandle. And so if you want to drop a comment, give a shout out to you. But also, if you have a question, feel free to just ask away. So I want to ask about your experience, like getting into designing fabric and surface design. How did that happen?
So, like I said, so I should also preface this by saying, because if you saw and I said this was like 20 some years ago, and you saw recently that I posted it was my 13th anniversary, I was married before. Not, everybody makes mistakes when they're a dumb 18-year-old. So,
Sorry for laughing.
oh, no, I can laugh about it now too. At the time I couldn't, but I can laugh about it now too. So, uh, I was in college, and I had originally started as a music major. I thought all growing up that I wanted to be a high school marching band teacher. And so I was in school for music, and it just wasn't going well for me. Not that I wasn't like doing well at music. I just realized super fast that I had no desire to teach high school kids.
Mm.
Like, even
That's
teaching
kind of
my own
important
kids
to that
during COVID
occupation.
when I had to do online school, I'm here to tell you I was not cut out to teach high school kids. Um, and I just really didn't want to be a high school teacher. Um, and I had gone to a school that, like, had a huge music program, but they also had a huge arts program, period. And the only other thing I remembered wanting to do when I grew up was fashion design. Um, and, like, I loved drawing. I was really good. My sister-in-law was actually we were looking through our senior yearbooks the other day, and my art teacher said, "You should have taken art 4 years ago," because I only took it my senior year because I had loaded up with so many music classes that I didn't have room for any other electives. Um, so but art was the only other thing that I ever really was, like, interested in doing as a career. And so when music wasn't working out well for me and I didn't wanna do that, I had been hanging out at my local quilt shop a lot, and they were talking about how they had started printing their own fabric because and this may have been in, like, the early days of spoon flower. I'm not sure where they were
Mhm.
printing it or if they were, like, printing it on those printable fabric sheets, but, I went to West Virginia University, and they have one of the most expensive logos to, like, do licensed work, and people in town wanted, like, West Virginia quilts and stuff, so they started printing their own things, which I realize now is also probably not technically legal.
Probably not.
No, there's no way, but, um, it was so expensive, and these weren't, like, designer cottons, it was just that their logo was so expensive to license that, um, they didn't wanna carry, like, these, like, crappy, not
Mhm.
designer cottons in their quilt shop, and so they were printing their own stuff, like, for people to make things, and I was like, "I wonder what you have to do to be a fashion designer or to be a fabric designer,"
Mhm.
and, like, when I looked at the stuff in the stores, it was, like, in West Virginia, and it's still in West Virginia, to my knowledge. The trend was really, like, reproduction fabrics, so, like, the Civil War fabrics, they
Mhm.
are huge there. I actually worked for a shop, um, I worked for a shop in another part of West Virginia that they ended up creating the Primitive Quilts and Projects magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still friends with them to this day. Like, and
That
there's
magazine was beautiful.
yeah, it's a beautiful magazine. And the original owners and of the magazine they're amazing people.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I wanted like bright, colorful things. And in my area, like uh nobody was carrying that. And I wanted to know what to do that I needed to do to make fabrics that I wanted to work with. And so that was kind of how I started. I put together a portfolio and applied to the painting program um,
Mm-hmm.
at WVU and got in. Um, and yeah, so I studied painting there. And at the time, there was so my younger sister was actually at another school that was only like visual arts. Um, and she was doing illustration, and that would have been my first pick, but it wasn't a program at my school. So, um, yeah, so my major was painting, and I never actually finished because I moved away and didn't live anywhere to um I moved away with my ex-husband, and nowhere that we lived had a painting program. And so I never graduated. I'm like 30 credits shy of my
Oh
degree,
God.
but like
Does that bother you? It seems like it bothers you.
it does, because I hate saying like, "Oh, I went to school for painting," and then like don't have a degree to show for it. But at the same time, like I didn't need the degree to get me where I am.
No.
And so um it is what it is, I guess. And like it more bothers me that I have a huge mound of student loans for a degree I didn't finish.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
understandable.
yeah, that's the harder part of it. Like,
Mhm.
um, but yeah, so um,
So then how did you put together like how did you come up with like your first collection? Did you start designing for Spoonflower? Did you go put together something and like present it? What did you do from there?
so I wanted to I wanted to be able, and I really like I took a long time putting my portfolio together. Like as early as 2016, I had ideas like ready and kind of collaborated for fabric collections, but I was really struggling with and back then there weren't as many companies that were printing digitally, and
Mhm.
I really 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 wanted to be able to transfer like my painterly um my
Skill.
painterly work. Yeah, I wanted to
Mhm.
be able to transfer that like to fabric, but I wasn't sure how to go about it. And so I would continue to make digital art, and I started in Illustrator because for years people were pounding that in your head that like you needed to know Illustrator to be in fabric design, and I'm here to tell you that's not true. So I do very little of my design in Illustrator. I actually do almost everything in Adobe Fresco,
Mm.
um, which is on the iPad, and that's how I was finally able to transfer my painterly skills. I basically relearned how to paint digitally, and so that's what I do. I paint my stuff digitally. Um, Occasionally, I do ink or painting on like traditional, and then I
Mhm.
scan it in and clean it up in Photoshop. But for the most part, I do all of my design in Fresco, and I do all my design in Fresco and then do the repeats in Photoshop, bring it into Photoshop.
Mhm.
So I'm here to tell you that's not true. And I finally learned that it wasn't true. My whole point in taking the class was to prove that it was possible, what I wanted to do. But I took the class from paint to pattern. with Sarah Watts of
Mm-hmm.
Ruby Star
I
Society.
remember that.
And
Mm-hmm.
I was in the very first round of that class. I saw it and I was like, it's a Photoshop class for fabric design. Like, there's proof that it can be done. And I really wanted to see because I knew that she kept those painterly elements in her work.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, after all these years of being told that I needed to do everything in Illustrator and that that was the industry standard and what you needed to do, here was somebody saying, no, it doesn't need to be done that way. And then I enrolled in Dylan Mierzwinski. She designs for Wyndham Fabrics, and I had just loved her artwork. And I met her at Quilt Market a few years back, and I enrolled in her Patreon group. It's called like the Fellow Artists Group, and she's just awesome. She's like the greatest cheerleader, and um, she's like the greatest cheerleader, and I can't say enough good things about her. And in that group, everybody just encouraged me because by that point in time, I probably had 5 collections designed, like at least partial fabric
And
collections.
wait, so you had 5 collections done, and you
I
hadn't.
had never submitted to anyone. I kept
Wow.
I just kept like, I don't know, I kept hemming and hawing over it. And so finally, when Quilt Market came back after COVID, the very first one, I took my portfolio and I had it all on my iPad and ready to go, and all these collections that I had designed. And I brought my husband with me to be like my emotional support team. Um, so that I wouldn't get too down on myself when I got told no, because it's inevitable. You're not going to be the right fit
Oh,
for everyone.
100%. Right.
And so after all this encouragement to go do it, I decided that I was going to go, and I made a list of the people I wanted to talk to. And so when who was initially my first choice, you know, kind of was disinterested in what I had to show them, they didn't like say no. They just, my husband could tell more than I could because I didn't want the answer to be no. He was like, I think it's time to move on. Who's your next choice? And I said, Dear Stella. And so we marched over there, and um, some of the girls who work at Dear Stella say they remember it, and they were like, "You were like so nervous, and you came over, but we totally remember you coming." And so I showed my portfolio to Dear Stella, and what became Kitty Litter was in that portfolio. It was just a different iteration of it. And
Mhm.
Jamie, who's the director of Dear
Yeah.
Stella, said, this would be an amazing basic. And um, so
And the
we
rest is
like,
history.
yeah, they literally like, she was like, I want this. I want you like then and there at Quilt Market. And the next year I had a booth at Quilt Market. So with
Wow.
Dear Stella. So yeah, getting ready to
That's
launch Kitty Litter.
that's
So
amazing. That's amazing. I mean, and that goes to show, like, sometimes you have to just work through things at your own pace, because I truly
absolutely.
believe that timing, like, happens when it's meant to happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely agree. And like, I hate to say it this way, but like, I don't know what other way to say it. Like, I felt like I was dumbing down my designs for that first group that I wanted to
Mm.
go to. And
Mhm.
not that I was making them, but I was losing all those painterly elements because they were still printing almost everything traditionally. Um, and so whereas Dear Stella is just such a good fit because there's so many other painters, like, that's what
Yeah.
Ray Ritchie does, that's her, you know, that's her love. And Ray Ritchie was the reason I was drawn to Dear Stella because I just absolutely
Oh,
adore
I adore
everything
her
she
work.
does.
I adore
Everything
it.
she does, I love.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, and so it was just such a good fit.
Mhm.
Um, and, you know, Jamie was asking me, like, she wanted to see more. She wanted to see more of what I could do, as versus that other work that I felt like I had done dumbed down. Like, she liked what I had, and she was like, "But it's a little flat." Like, that's what she called it, and I was like,
Wow.
yeah, and I was like, "Well, I don't want my artwork to be flat, like, I don't want it to be that way." So, um, yeah, and so
To give
that
you an encouraging nudge.
yes, it was the encouraging nudge to do exactly what I wanted to do. Yeah.
And I love Jamie. I mean, the whole
Yeah.
crew over at Dear Stella is fabulous.
Oh my gosh, they're like I absolutely love them. I love designing for them. It's just such a good team of
Your
people.
artwork is like a perfect fit for Dear Stella because I feel like so much of their fabric is very, like you said, painterly. It's just
Yeah,
very artistic and more, and it's fun and quirky
and
and
that's my style too.
yeah, right, and a little silly, and
Yeah,
you know, you look at the fabric and sometimes you crack up because there's some little like you know visual joke in the
yeah,
line. That's what it is. Like that's why kitty litter is so perfect.
yeah.
I want to pause again and say hi, give a shout out to Angie. Hi, Angie. And hello, Pam, who's coming to us from the Pacific Northwest. Going to repeat that we're with Pammie Jane from Dear Stella Fabrics, and she's an amazing quilt designer. We're going to get to talking about quilt design next. But if you have any questions, feel free to just drop one below and we'll ask it live. So, all right. So you come out with this, like, you come up with your first collection and then what happens? Like, I know that you have to design like a whole bunch of things for the booth and all of that. Like, how stressful and like exhilarating was that?
Um, Both of those words are perfect descriptors. Yes. I'm here to tell you that the night before in my Airbnb, I was binding 5 quilts for my first schoolhouse.
Mhm.
And we drove, and I feel like I didn't sleep for, like, I think 2 days, like, before we left, and so I was asleep, like, the entire way until we got to Colorado. So, from Idaho to Colorado, I was totally asleep, um, and it was intense, and it was my first booth, so I wanted it to be, like, really spectacular, and my husband helped with everything, and he was there, so he's he's my business partner, but most of what he does is behind the scenes. He actually long arms for me, and
Oh, wow.
he learned how to long arm, um, so that he could quilt all of my quilts that I was
Oh my
designing
gosh.
for Quilt
That's
Market.
so sweet.
Yeah, so now I have my own in-house long arm quilter, and yeah, so, um, but we figured with the amount of projects that I was going through, and I don't the only person local to me that was really designing, was, Bonnie of Bonnie and Camille,
Hmm.
and, she actually lives, like, 10 minutes away from me, and I, but she sent her quilt somewhere too, and I didn't have anyone local who, like, understood, like, the time demands, like, that you
Gosh.
usually get fabric, like, a month before quilt market and have, like, all this stuff to get done. Um, and so we ended up just deciding to buy a long arm for that purpose because I didn't have anyone to keep up with the demand. And so, yeah, the first quilt that he ever quilted was my plaid with catitude quilt. That yeah, that was the first quilt that he ever quilted,
Wow.
and then yeah, and then he had all these, like, quilts that he figured out how to do all the custom stuff on the computer, and I should say he's really talented at a lot of things, but computers are typically not his strong suit, so the fact that he figured out how to do all the long arm stuff is still pretty impressive to me. So,
I love it. I
yeah.
love it.
But
I
he's, like, my biggest cheerleader, and it's
I
really
was gonna
funny.
say,
For a long time, he had, like, my book tucked under the seat in his truck, so, like, when people would, like, ask about me and what I did, he would, like, whip out my book and show them. And now he like pulls up my fabric and shows people,
My
and
husband would totally do the same thing.
yeah, he's really
It,
cute.
it was terrible. We'd be in Joann Fabrics, and I'd like go in to pick up, some little thing that I needed at the last minute, and he would like see Quilt Maker magazine or one of the magazines that I edited, and like would hold it up and like tell the people in line that that was me. And I was like, I just want to go into a store and like be nobody. It would be great. But it's with his heart that he's just really
Yeah,
proud. And so
that's how my husband is, and
yeah.
it's really fun. So, because we get a lot of comments like he goes to QuiltCon with me and everything, and he's like super funny and like he's totally a people person, whereas I'm more introverted, like by nature. I'm not shy or anything. I'm just more of a homebody. And he goes out there and talks to everybody, and we've had so many people that say like, I don't think my husband even knows what I do for a living, like, and so they're like, how did you get him to come here? And I'm like, I don't know, he wants to come. So
He volunteered.
yeah, yeah. So and I'm glad, to have someone to travel with, and we get to work side by side a lot, and it's really fun. So
I love that. I love that so much. So, we still have actually a bunch, like a few of your patterns and a bunch of your Curious Garden fabric in stock. And so I put a link below for anyone who's interested in checking out some of Pam's fabric. It is so stinking cute and so colorful. And when you were describing, coming from West Virginia and how like the Civil War prints were like those were the fabrics that
yeah.
that you were seeing in the store, to a fabric collection like Curious Garden that's like so colorful and bright. I can't think of like a further difference like in types of fabrics.
Right.
Did you at the time, did you even know that like quilting cotton could be that bright? I mean, you knew garment fabrics, so obviously you knew that like there were bright
Yeah.
fabrics out there.
Yeah. I could, but like even Joanne in my area, like I was seeing a lot of like dull stuff. And the only thing at the time I was seeing was like there were a lot of batiks that were bright and colorful.
Mhm.
And I wasn't necessarily interested in that too. And I know like at the time there were other designers who were around, because I mean this was around 2006, 2007 um when I was in art school and was like really exploring doing this and trying to figure out
Mhm.
how to become this, because I hadn't heard of the term like surface pattern designer. I don't know how new that term is, but I definitely hadn't heard of it. So, um, mm, um, I know like I'm pretty sure Tula Pink was designing around
Mhm.
that time. Um,
Early Tula, maybe towards the late to early, like I don't know.
I
I
think
was
maybe
I would guess
2009
around
was her first.
2000. Yeah,
I think
I would say I was about to
2009
say
might have been her first
mhm.
collection for Moda. I'm not
Yeah.
positive. Um, but yeah, and I know Amy Butler was designing,
Mhm.
um, and I had just barely started to see some Amy Butler, but it was still a lot more graphic than what I was doing. But I have like early Amy Butler from that time, because I was so excited to see it. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's bright
Sure was.
and pretty.
Yeah.
So,
That's
um,
amazing. That's really like it's amazing to me that you kind of were grasping onto what you knew in your heart you wanted to do, and even though you weren't seeing what it was. And maybe that even egged you on a little further because, what you do is different from anyone else.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm really proud of like what I've put out there, because I feel like it's very true to me and what I wanted to do. So, I'm really proud of all the fabric that I have put out there and that's coming out, and yeah, and I'm super super excited about everything that's up and coming.
So a question just popped into my head about like designing. So when you're designing a fabric collection, are you thinking about the quilts that you want to design to go with the collection? And in what order does that go?
Sometimes, um, sometimes I am, and sometimes I don't know. Like the first few collections, for sure. Um, Honestly, if I start picturing cats, it usually all comes together. Like I feel like I have unlimited ideas when it comes to cats. Um, I think it depends. I think it depends on the collection. Like cats and Halloween are the two that I seem to have no problem with ideas, like just absolutely endless ideas for cats and Halloween. And then I start to get into other things that I really like 90s. I love like 90s everything because it just reminds me of being, a kid and being a teenager. And so um, I have a lot of fun with that too. So those seem to be things that inspire me. But coming up with quilts in the 90s is harder. So because my thoughts on the 90s are like, I want like Lisa Frank and,
Mhm.
like those were things
Mhm.
from the 90s that inspired me. But then when you see quilts from the 90s,
Oh my God.
they were like it's like this thick and, they had like the fluffiest batting and like a
Not
giant
always true.
ruffle,
Not
like a
always
giant
true.
no, not
We
always, because like I said, that book is from that book I have that inspired me to start quilting was from the 90s, but there are some quilts in there that are like, like a puffy heart in the center of the quilt.
because that was the
And the
thing.
closest thing I remember to quilting that my mom did, do you remember those wreaths in the 90s that people made that was like it was like stuffed and then you like
Yes.
braided the stuff? Like, we had those in my house that my mom made.
That's too funny. I
And so
started
those are the
quilting in the
things when I
90s.
think of, like, quilting in the 90s, I think of that. So
Mhm.
I have to take my, like, Lisa Frank, like, in your face colors and animals, and turn that into a quilt. So in that
Yeah, you
situation,
do.
like the fabric comes first and then the
Mhm.
quilt design. But, um like with Curious Garden, I definitely had ideas in mind for quilts when I was designing. And so, yeah, I think it can go, I think it can go both ways. So,
That's amazing. One of my coworkers who's the manager of the store, the retail store in Keepsake,
mhm.
here in North Carolina, just she gets her nails done every week or so, and she has this person who does your nails, and you could pick designer's choice. Like it's you get like $10 off, but it's whatever the nail artist wants to do. And last week she totally got Lisa Frank nails.
I've had Lisa Frank nails before too. For anyone who can see, there's little itty bitty bees on my nails right now because
Oh my gosh.
my
How
son
cute.
graduated and um so I have like the colors of his high school and their mascot was a bee.
Oh my
Um
gosh. How
Yeah,
cute.
so I had matching nails for his graduation,
I
but
love it.
I always have my nails something funky and fun with my nails too.
I love that. I love that so much. Yeah, it's funny because I started quilting in the early 90s, and I what I was making back then versus what I make now are just opposite ends of the spectrum because we just didn't have all this fabric at all.
True.
Like you only gotta when I would go into the store, I was a young mom. I had a fabric store that was literally 2 blocks away from my house. And so if I could scrape together like $2, in my food budget, I could get half a yard of fabric. And
Yeah, it was so much cheaper too, like,
right.
I remember I'd go to Joann, but then I'd go to the local quilt shop, and I remember fabrics being like $8 or $9 a yard, and I'm like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, it's so expensive. And now they're like twice
Oh my
that.
gosh. There was a shop in Boston where I was living at the time that was $5.99 a yard, and they had an entire room of quilting cotton, which was incredible to me because that was like so rare. The place that I had near my house, literally, I mean, it was as big as like my arms. Like it was maybe 5 feet, and not all of it was 100% cotton. Sometimes it was cotton poly blends, and that was just what you had. You had to be super
Yeah.
careful about like what you bought, and you had to go home and wash it right away because it might run, and sometimes you couldn't use the fabric after you bought it, you know.
Yeah.
um and if you saw a color that was like all of a sudden trendy one year, you had to buy some of it because you might not be able to get butter yellow or like, you know, a sage green the next year. And so that's why
Yeah.
people had stashes, you know, because we just
Yeah.
couldn't get it. So it was really, there was a lot of like, you had to put forethought into what you wanted or needed because you didn't know. And like, it was just so different. So different.
Well, even it was the really early 2000s when I started quilting, and yeah, it was still very similar. I mean, there were some designers starting to come on the market, but not a lot, and not a lot, and it was still like there was not much variation in what you saw. Like, I feel like everybody had the same looking flowers, and
Yeah. Yeah.
you had like 3 shades of pink to choose from, you know?
Right.
Like,
Right.
it's
And there would be
definitely not
times
like
where
it is
like
now.
everything was pink and brown, or like
Yeah,
everything was red and blue, you know,
yeah,
like
yep. I know, I remember this purse that I made, and, like, I think I only had 1 kid at the time, but, like, it was like everything was pink and brown in the fabric collection. Like, there was, like, pink and brown plaid and, like, a pink and brown floral, and that was yeah, that was a very, early 2000s trend,
yeah,
like the pink and
totally.
brown together.
Oh yeah. Yep. I remember that. So how many kids do you have? Can I ask that personal question?
Yeah, I have 4,
Wow. How old are they?
um, almost 20, and then 18, and then, 12 and almost 11.
And so what do they think about what you do?
Um, I feel like all of them, except for my oldest, actually really enjoy what I do. They like they all have quilts that they love that I made, and, um, I don't know if you saw, but, like, I have a print called The Croning, um, that's a nod to Schitt's Creek. Like, there's a lot of my fabric that is pop culture references, even
Uh-huh.
if it's not directly pop culture, like, it's, um, named after some obscure pop culture reference, but, um, my my the son that just graduated has a thing with crows, and, uh, and he really loved Schitt's Creek
Oh
also,
my
and
God, that episode was hilarious.
yeah, The Croning, that's probably my favorite
Mhm.
episode when they have the premiere, and so he asked me if I would make him a shirt from the Croning fabric, and he actually it was how I bribed him to take senior pictures because he did not want to have senior pictures, and
Oh my gosh, I
I
love
was like,
this.
I'm a photographer as well as, a quilter, and so, we didn't even discuss that, but that's what I did before I actually was designing fabric. I was doing photography and lots of photography and, anyway, but I do all my kids' portraits and everything, and he didn't want his senior pictures taken, and I was like, "How about if I make you that crow shirt? Then will you take senior picture will let me take senior pictures?" And he was like, "Alright." But then he actually wore it under his cap and gown, and he has a quilt that I made him, uh, that has that fabric in it too, and so which we've actually dubbed the Ooh David quilt because it's all black and white. That's, like,
I
all
love it.
black and white
Oh my gosh,
and
I want to see
gray.
a picture of it. Oh, we got a comment from Chad who said he loves Schitt's Creek. I love Schitt's Creek too.
Yes, that was
Oh
a
my gosh, so
fantastic
funny.
show.
Yeah, yeah, it's totally a fantastic show, and just really just so funny, so heartwarming at times, just
Yeah.
so good. Oh my goodness, I love that. It's nice when you have your kids enjoying what you do and, being proud of it on some level, because
Yeah.
obviously
Yeah,
obviously
like,
you
they all have quilts that they love, and, like, I'm so glad. My daughter, because I only have one girl in the mix, and so she, like, wants to snag up every quilt that she can possibly get, like, she always claims them, and
oh my gosh,
so I'm
I
like,
love
"What?
that.
You can't have them all, sweetie," and, like, she's always like, What are you gonna do with this one? What are you gonna do with this when you're done, taking pictures of it?" And I'm like, well, I need to keep it because it, needs to be like a shop sample, sorry." But, yeah, she definitely is into all the quilts that I make more so than the other kids, but they all except like I said, except for the oldest, he's just sort of indifferent to what I do, so but yeah,
There's
the rest
always one.
yeah. The rest of the kids, I think he doesn't I kinda get the impression from him that he doesn't think that this is a real job. That's
Oh, interesting.
sort of the impression I get from him. But the rest of my
Hmm,
kids are part of it. And actually,
interesting.
the one I made the shirt for, he actually usually he puts all my patterns together for me, and so I pay him to put all my
Nice.
patterns because I don't have enough hours in the day to, um, be folding and stuffing,
Yeah,
patterns.
I imagine
So,
not. Holy cow.
yeah, so he does that for me. So,
I love that. Make it a family business.
yep.
I would have my kids helping at market, like right before market, because they inevitably I was always like doing something,
Yeah.
where I had to get something done for someone at some point, and I would just there were times where I would just be so hitting the wall, and my kids would like, okay, what can I do? And I just put them to
I
work doing something.
I even have like, I'll have kids, I'm like, "Go make me a quesadilla," and, like, they're
Yeah.
bringing it down to my studio. That's very typical. So, "Go make me some lunch because I don't have time to stop." And
Yeah.
so they're very aware that before I go to a show that our house is complete chaos and they have to help mom, so
I love that. Yeah, because I mean, you got to help mom when it comes to this stuff.
yeah.
I love it. Well, it has been such a pleasure talking to you and getting to know you better, and hearing about like your background
Thanks.
and how you got into this.
Thanks. Yeah,
Yeah.
I really enjoyed talking, and so it's fun to come on these shows and, um, I don't know, get myself out there to the quilt people because, like I said, I'm kind of a homebody, and I am terrible at social media, like, absolutely terrible, like
I don't know about that. You seem like your pictures show up in my feed all the time on Instagram, but why don't we? You're at Pammie Jane
Yes,
on Instagram. And
yes.
so, everyone who's watching, if you have an Instagram, please go follow. Give her some encouragement and see all
And
of her cute pictures.
It's Pammie Jane IE, not Pammie.
Yes.
So, it's Pammie. So,
Yes. I should have linked. I'll go back in under our YouTube and on our Facebook Live and not correct it. It's spelled correctly, but add your link to
oh, yeah,
your social media for you,
thank you.
because I just
I
feel like
appreciate
that
it.
that's helpful, so people can just click on it and it'll bring them to it. So that I can certainly do that immediately as soon as we get off.
Yeah,
But it's been just such a pleasure. So thank you again for joining me, and thanks to everyone who's watching. And please like, share, subscribe so that you'll be notified the next time that we go live. I will see you on Wednesday, and it'll probably be just me, so you'll be sewing along with me on Wednesday. But I look forward to seeing you all next time.
Bye.